I don't want to deal with people that have no conscience. If I'm going to be with people, I want to be with people that care.
Let's be honest, American Chopper was never just about bikes.
And if they wanted to make me look like a bad guy, which they did, they could do it. And if I said to them, this is affecting me, it's affecting my business, well, they don't really care,
It was about blowups, walkouts, and enough workplace drama to fill a soap opera. Paul Teutul Senior, the gruff, mustachioed boss of Orange County Choppers, has finally let slip the 5 employees who pushed him to the edge. From betrayals to breakdowns, this isn't just a hit list, it's a behind-the-scenes reckoning. Think you know who made the cut? You might be surprised. Number 5. Cody Connelly, the protege who walked. If you watched the early seasons of American Chopper, you definitely remember Cody Connelly. He wasn't just some background guy sweeping up after the big builds. Cody was the quiet kid with serious potential. A teenage apprentice who was turning heads in a shop full of grizzled bike builders, Cody earned his spot the hard way. Paul Teutul Senior saw something in him from day one. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he had a natural talent, a solid work ethic, and he kept his head down in the middle of all the chaos. For a while, it looked like Cody was being groomed as the future of Orange County Choppers. Cody started working at OCC while he was still in high school, which was wild considering most kids his age were flipping burgers. Meanwhile, he was learning how to build custom motorcycles from the ground up. Paul Sr. treated him like one of the family, or at least like the son who didn't talk back. And the audience loved it. Here was this young kid surrounded by all the screaming, tension, and clashing egos, and he just quietly built killer bikes. He even helped with some of the most iconic builds in OCC history, including the old-school chopper. To most fans, Cody represented the best part of the show: talent, loyalty, and no drama. Or so we thought. Everything changed in 2005. What should have been a dream moment turned into the beginning of the end. When Cody graduated high school, the OCC crew presented him with a custom chopper, supposedly as a gift. Cameras were rolling, and the whole thing was framed as a celebration. Paul Sr. beamed with pride. Cody looked stunned, even emotional. It was a big moment, especially for a teenager who had earned his stripes in the shop. But behind the scenes, things weren't nearly as heartwarming as they appeared on TV. Years later, Cody claimed that the bike was never actually given to him. Despite the on-camera presentation, he said he never received ownership of the chopper. Not only that, but he alleged that OCC continued to use the bike and his image for promotional purposes long after he had left the company. In 2009, Cody filed a lawsuit against Paul Sr. and OCC, alleging misappropriation of likeness, breach of contract, and fraud. It was a bombshell. Nobody saw it coming, especially from someone like Cody, who had always been so low-key and respectful. Paul Sr. didn't make a public statement right away, but you could feel the chill in the air anytime Cody's name came up after that. For Paul, it wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a betrayal. He saw Cody as a kind of surrogate son, someone he had brought into the fold and given a massive opportunity. For that relationship to end in court documents and legal threats hit a nerve. Eventually, Paul made a few comments in interviews, calling the situation disappointing and implying that Cody was ungrateful. But the underlying message was clear. Cody had crossed a line. Making matters worse, or more awkward, Cody didn't exactly disappear after leaving OCC. He linked up with Vinnie DiMartino, another OCC defector, and the two started building bikes together at V-Force Customs. Fans were thrilled. It felt like a reunion of the good guys, the quiet pros who just wanted to build without all the yelling. But for Paul Sr., it probably felt like salt in the wound. two of his most trusted builders teaming up outside of his control? That was never going to sit well. Now, was Cody really a terrible employee? Not by most standards. He was respectful, hard-working, and genuinely talented. He wasn't lazy, he didn't stir up drama, and he never disrespected Paul on camera. But Paul doesn't operate by standard management rules. For him, loyalty is the one thing that matters more than skill. And once Cody filed that lawsuit, there was no going back. The moment Cody walked away from OCC, and especially the moment he lawyered up, he went from golden boy to blacklisted. Fans were divided on the whole situation. Some believed Cody had every right to take legal action if he'd been promised something and didn't get it. Others thought it was a bad move, biting the hand that fed him. The truth probably lives somewhere in between. Reality TV blurs the lines between what's staged and what's real, and you can bet that some promises made on camera don't always translate to signed contracts behind the scenes. Still, it was shocking to see someone like Cody, who had never shown any signs of discontent, take such a serious step. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court. Details were never made public, but Cody got what he needed to move on, and OCC kept rolling along without him. But the relationship was permanently damaged. Cody never returned to OCC, even for specials or interviews. No guest appearances, no reconciliations, no behind-the-scenes footage showing a friendly visit. Just silence. And in a family-style shop like OCC, that silence speaks volumes. Years later, when Paul Senior was asked in interviews about the employees who let him down the most, he didn't explode in a fit of rage or trash-talk Cody. Instead, he spoke with a kind of bitterness that cut deeper. He didn't need to yell, just the fact that Cody made the list said it all. For Paul Senior, it wasn't about whether Cody could weld or build a frame. It was about trust. And once that was gone, there was no rebuilding it. In the world of American Chopper, walking away from the job wasn't the worst offense. It was walking away from the family. And for Paul Senior, Cody's departure and lawsuit made him something worse than a bad employee. It made him a traitor. But not every departure was filled with shouting and chaos. Sometimes, the quiet exits cut the deepest. Number 4, Vinnie DiMartino, the right-hand man who bounced. If there was one guy who seemed like he could actually survive the madness of working for Paul Teutul Senior, it was Vinnie DiMartino. Steady, skilled, and never the type to get caught up in shouting matches, Vinnie was the calm in the storm at Orange County Choppers. He was Paul Senior's go-to guy for years, the right hand that made sure every wild idea actually turned into a rideable, jaw-dropping machine. While Paul Jr. clashed with his dad almost daily, Vinnie kept his head down and made sure the shop kept moving. He wasn't flashy, but he was reliable. And in a place like OCC, that made him almost indispensable. Fans respected Vinnie for one simple reason. He got things done. He was a master fabricator, a builder's builder. The kind of guy who could take a vague concept and turn it into something that looked like it belonged in a museum, or at least on a magazine cover. He didn't need the spotlight, and he wasn't chasing fame. He just loved building bikes. That's why his sudden departure from OCC in 2007 stunned everyone, from fans to the Teutuls themselves. The announcement came during Season 4 of American Chopper, and it hit like a gut punch. Vinnie had decided to leave OCC and start his own shop. No big blowout, no epic fight, no flipping over tool carts, just a quiet, measured decision to walk away. That's what made it hurt more. This wasn't someone storming off in the middle of a meltdown. This was someone Paul Senior actually trusted, and he was choosing to leave on his own terms. For Paul Senior, the move felt like betrayal, even if he didn't say it outright at the time. You could see it in the way he talked about Vinnie after the fact. There was this cold, clipped tone in interviews. He'd say things like Vinnie wanted to go off and do his own thing. But you could tell he didn't really buy it. In Paul's world, you don't just walk away from OCC unless something's broken. And Vinnie, from his perspective, never explained what that something was. But fans had been paying attention. Behind Vinnie's calm demeanor, there had been cracks showing for a while. He was overworked, undercredited, and increasingly stuck in the middle of the Teutul family crossfire. Every day brought a new argument between Paul Senior and Paul Jr., and Vinnie was usually the one trying to hold the team together in the middle of it. On camera, he'd try to stay out of it, but off camera, the toll was adding up. The shop wasn't just a workplace anymore, it was a pressure cooker. What finally pushed Vinnie out wasn't one big dramatic moment. It was a slow build of frustration, exhaustion, and a sense that he'd hit the ceiling at OCC. He wasn't going to become a partner. He wasn't getting the credit he deserved. And let's be honest, he wasn't exactly being set up to succeed beyond the show. So he made the move that few dared to make. He left OCC and struck out on his own. V-Force Customs was born, and just like that, one of Paul Senior's most valuable people was gone. For a guy who claimed to run the shop like a family, Paul Senior took the departure personally. He didn't erupt, but he didn't exactly hide the sting either. In interviews years later, he's admitted that Vinnie leaving hurt, and he's hinted at lingering resentment. That's what lands Vinnie on this list, not because he was lazy or dramatic or incompetent. Quite the opposite. He was too good, and he left anyway. And for Paul Senior, that made him one of the worst. Of course, worst is relative here. Vinnie never trashed the shop, never aired dirty laundry in the press, and didn't sue anyone. He just wanted to build bikes on his own terms. But Paul Senior doesn't see things in shades of gray. You're either with him or against him. And once Vinnie left, he became against. That's just how the OCC universe works. To make matters worse, again, from Paul's point of view, Vinnie teamed up with Cody Connelly after the lawsuit fiasco. The two worked together at V-Force Customs, and fans flocked to see what they were up to. It was like a soft rebellion. Two of OCC's most talented and underappreciated guys striking out on their own, away from the screaming and chaos. They didn't throw shade publicly, but the message was clear. They were done with the drama. There were whispers that Vinnie might come back one day, maybe for a reunion episode or even a long-term return. But it never really happened. He made a brief appearance when American Chopper Senior vs. Junior launched, helping out at Paul Jr. Designs. That alone probably added another notch to Paul Senior's grudge. Seeing Vinnie help Paul Jr., the son he had a near-death rivalry with, was like rubbing salt in an open wound. In Paul Senior's mind, that move all but sealed Vinnie's fate on the blacklist. But here's the thing. If Paul really hated Vinnie, he probably would have dragged him through the mud in every interview. But he didn't. That's how you know it hurt. It's easier to rant about people you never really liked. With Vinnie, the disappointment ran deeper. Paul had trusted him. He'd leaned on him. And in the end, Vinnie still walked out. Number 3. Michael Teutul, the comic relief turned liability. If American Chopper had a heart, a clown nose, and a coffee cup permanently attached to its hand, it was Michael Teutul, better known to fans simply as Mikey. The youngest of the Teutul clan, Mikey wasn't the fabricator, the business genius, or the creative visionary. He was the comic relief, the goofball who wandered around the shop, cracking jokes. dodging responsibilities and diffusing tension with well-timed nonsense. At first, it worked. Mikey was the perfect antidote to the endless screaming matches between Paul Senior and Paul Jr. When things got too heated, Mikey would roll in on a tricycle, literally or figuratively, and get a laugh out of everyone. He wasn't a builder, but he was part of the show's soul. But over time, what started as lovable turned into something a lot less charming. The truth was, Mikey never really had a defined role at OCC. He didn't build bikes. He didn't manage the business. He didn't design. And as the company grew and the pressure piled on, his presence became more confusing than helpful. It wasn't just that he wasn't contributing. It was that no one quite knew how to make him contribute. He was like the kid brother who kept hanging around long after the garage became a $1 million enterprise. Eventually, the jokes stopped being funny. Behind the scenes, things were getting worse. Mikey's struggles weren't just about work ethic or direction, they were about addiction. Over the years, it became clear that Mikey was battling personal demons that had little to do with OCC and everything to do with self-control, purpose, and mental health. His drinking became a real issue, and even though it was hinted at lightly on the show, the seriousness of his problems came out in bits and pieces later. Paul Senior, who had no problem blowing up at employees and family alike, found himself in unfamiliar territory. This wasn't a bike build gone wrong. This was his son spiraling. Mikey was eventually sent to rehab, and his absence from the show was written off as a break or a personal retreat. But fans noticed. When Mikey wasn't around, the mood shifted. As chaotic as OCC was, Mikey always brought some kind of humanity to it, even if he wasn't holding a wrench. The shop felt colder without him, but at the same time, things ran more smoothly. And that's where the real tension began. Was Mikey helping, or was he just there? Paul Senior struggled with it publicly. You could see it in his eyes when Mikey came back from rehab and tried to get back into the fold. There was this mix of fatherly concern and managerial frustration. Mikey wanted to be part of the business, but he didn't really want to do the business. He didn't have the skills to build or the drive to learn them. And at OCC, if you aren't producing something, you're just taking up space. For Paul Senior, the line between love and leadership blurred to the breaking point. The lowest moment came when the Teutul family finally imploded, and Paul Senior had to make a decision. Mikey sided with Paul Jr. during the infamous fallout between father and son. Whether it was about business philosophy, family trauma, or just years of unresolved tension, Mikey made it clear he wasn't going to be a pawn in Paul Senior's empire anymore. He didn't want to choose sides, but by speaking out about the toxicity at OCC and expressing concern over how his father was treating everyone, he drew a clear line in the sand. And Paul Senior did what he always does when he feels betrayed. He shut the door. Hard. At one point, Paul even barred Mikey from entering the OCC building. His own son, the guy who once showed up in a Santa costume just to make the guys laugh, was now locked out like a stranger. It wasn't just sad, it was surreal. You'd think of all the people Paul Senior could tolerate, it would be Mikey. But the thing about Mikey was that he didn't just stop being helpful, he became a liability. His addiction issues, his public siding with Paul Jr., his refusal to get serious, it was too much. And for a man like Paul Senior, who sees the world in terms of results, there was no room left for the class clown. Fans were split again. Some felt Paul Senior had gone too far, cutting out his own son when he was clearly struggling. Others understood it from a business perspective. Audit had become a serious operation with real deadlines, massive contracts, and a reputation to uphold. Mikey, lovable as he was, couldn't coast forever. And when things started falling apart behind the scenes, he wasn't pulling anyone forward, he was pulling them down. Eventually, Mikey stepped away entirely. He focused on art, launched a small gallery, and made a quiet life for himself outside of motorcycles and metal. It was probably the best thing for him. The spotlight was never really healthy for Mikey, even if he was great TV. He occasionally made appearances during the Senior Versus. Junior spin-off, but by then, the damage was done. He was the Teutul who didn't belong anywhere, not in the shop, not in the boardroom, and not on the build floor. Just floating in the middle of a family war he never wanted to be part of in the first place. Sometimes it's the ones who keep their heads down and avoid the drama who end up leaving the biggest mark. Number 2. Rick Petko, the silent rebel. If there was ever a guy at Orange County Choppers who kept his head down, did his job, and stayed out of the drama, it was Rick Petko. He wasn't flashy. He didn't yell. He didn't try to steal the spotlight or stir the pot. Rick was the type of guy you'd want working next to you on a late-night build, reliable, focused, and damn good at what he did. On a show full of outsized personalities, Rick was the calm one, the grown-up in the room. And that made it all the more surprising when he quietly walked away from OCC, leaving behind a shop and a boss that had relied on him more than they probably realized. Rick joined American Chopper a bit later than the core crew, but he quickly made a name for himself. He was a welder and fabricator with serious skills, and he didn't need to scream about it to get noticed. Fans appreciated his no-nonsense attitude and the way he just got it done. While Paul Senior and Paul Jr. were busy exploding at each other and Mikey was off doing Mikey things, Rick was building bikes. Clean, precise, beautiful bikes. He brought a craftsman's pride to the job, and it showed. But what also showed, if you were really paying attention, was the wear and tear. Over time, you could see Rick starting to fray around the edges. Not dramatically, not publicly, but in those quiet, tired looks he gave the camera. The long sighs. The way he started to seem less like a guy doing what he loved, and more like a guy just trying to survive the circus. Because at the end of the day, Rick was a builder, not a reality star. And the longer American Chopper went on, the more it became about the show and less about the bikes. Unlike some of the others who clashed directly with Paul Senior, Rick never had a blowout moment. He didn't raise his voice or storm out in the middle of a build. That's not how he operated. He just eventually reached a point where it wasn't working anymore. In 2013, he made the quiet decision to leave OCC and focus on his family and his own custom fabrication work. No lawsuits, no media tour, no bridge burning, just a clean break. And yet, according to Paul Senior, Rick's departure hit harder than some of the louder exits. It's not that Rick was disloyal, he just outgrew the place. After years of grinding in the background while others got the credit or the camera time, Rick realized he wanted something more stable, something that didn't involve navigating the emotional minefield that was the Teutul family dynamic. He had a wife, kids, and dreams of running his own small business. That's not betrayal, that's growing up. But in Paul Senior's world, where staying means loyalty and leaving means abandonment, Rick's exit still stung. What made it worse for Paul was probably the fact that Rick didn't have to leave. He wasn't being pushed out. He wasn't caught in a feud. He was respected, even liked, by everyone in the shop. And yet, he still left. That kind of quiet departure says more than 100 angry words. It says, "I've had enough." And for someone like Paul Senior, who expects his people to tough it out no matter what, that quiet, "no thanks," probably felt like a slap in the face. To be clear, Rick never said anything negative about OCC or Paul Senior in public. In interviews, he was always respectful, sometimes even nostalgic. He credited OCC with helping him grow and giving him exposure he wouldn't have had otherwise. But he also made it clear that he didn't miss the chaos. He didn't miss the cameras. And he certainly didn't miss the daily tension that hung in the air like welding smoke. In that way, Rick was the silent rebel, not the kind who screams and flips tables, but the kind who walks away with his dignity intact and never looks back. Paul has rarely mentioned Rick by name in interviews, but when the topic of people who disappeared or bailed comes up, there's a tone, a sense of frustration, a hint of disappointment. It's not fiery anger, it's quieter, more personal. Rick wasn't just a good employee, he was one of the best. And losing someone like that, especially without a fight, can make a leader question what they did wrong. Or, in Paul Senior's case, double down on the idea that anyone who leaves must not have been cut out for it in the first place. In truth, Rick was cut out for it. He just chose not to live in that pressure cooker forever. He saw the writing on the wall, took his skills, and carved out his own path. And that, ironically, is probably what lands him on Paul Senior's unofficial list of worst employees, not because he failed, but because he didn't. And what about the people behind the camera? Can they be the biggest instigators of all? Number 1. Joe Pulyophiko, the editor turned instigator. Joe Pulyophiko might be the most surprising name on this list because he wasn't actually one of the builders or fabricators grinding away in the OCC shop. Nope, Joe was behind the scenes, the man with the editing bay, the one who pieced together all those explosive moments that made American Chopper binge-worthy. He was the show's editor, but don't let that title fool you. In the wild world of reality TV, an editor can hold as much power as the bosses on the shop floor. And in Joe's case, that power sometimes crossed a line, turning him from a behind-the-scenes hero into one of the worst people Paul Senior ever dealt with. Reality TV thrives on drama, and American Chopper was no exception. Fans tuned in not just for the insane bikes, but for the shouting matches, the family feuds, and the pure, unfiltered chaos. A lot of that was real, sure, but a lot of it was also shaped in the editing room. Joe's job was to take hours of footage and turn it into a story that kept viewers hooked. That meant highlighting fights, exaggerating arguments, and sometimes cutting conversations to make someone look way worse than they actually were. For Paul Senior, that kind of manipulation felt like betrayal. On camera, Paul was the loudest voice, the boss everyone had to listen to. But off camera, he was at the mercy of editors like Joe, who could make him look like a tyrant or a villain just by how they cut together a scene. Paul Senior has been open about how frustrating it was to see himself portrayed in ways he felt were unfair or exaggerated. And when you're used to being in control, watching someone else control your image can be infuriating. Joe wasn't just slicing and dicing footage. According to insiders and Paul Senior himself, Joe occasionally encouraged situations to escalate, nudging people to argue harder or pushing the family toward bigger, more dramatic blow-ups. That's reality TV 101, but for a family business turned national sensation, it felt like crossing a line. Joe wasn't just telling the story anymore, he was shaping the story, sometimes at the expense of relationships and reputations. One of the most infamous examples came during the height of the Paul Senior versus Paul Jr. feud. Viewers saw explosive fights and intense confrontations, many of which felt like they had been edited for maximum impact. Joe's fingerprints were all over those episodes, and Paul Senior later admitted that some of the scenes felt orchestrated or manipulated in ways that made the family drama worse than it really was. In his mind, Joe wasn't just capturing history, he was rewriting it. Paul Senior's frustration with Joe wasn't just about how the footage was cut. It was about trust. When you're inviting cameras into your family and your business, you expect some level of respect. But Joe, as an editor and a producer, was playing a different game. He wasn't there to protect the family legacy or make everyone look good. He was there to create ratings. And when ratings are on the line, family ties take a back seat. The tension eventually boiled over. Paul Senior started to distance himself from the production team, questioning the motives of people like Joe. In interviews and behind-the-scenes stories, Paul Senior has hinted that his trust in the crew was broken, and he wasn't shy about saying that some of the show's behind-the-scenes players were as much a problem as the on-camera conflicts. Joe, as the guy who shaped the narrative, became a symbol of that broken trust. What makes Joe's place on this list so interesting is that he wasn't an employee in the traditional sense. He wasn't late to work. He didn't botch a build, and he didn't get into shouting matches on the floor. Instead, he was a puppet master of perception, pulling strings from the editing room and turning the Teutul family's real struggles into high-stakes drama. To Paul, that made him as damaging as any employee who quit, got fired, or sued the company. What do you think of this list? We'd love to hear from you, and if you liked the video, subscribe for more content in the channel.